Alright guys, so we are here back at my house for video 3 of our third unit, so video 3.3 on the cell types of the integumentary system. This is a pretty meaty lesson, talking about four main cell types: Merkel cells, Langerhans cells, melanocytes, and keratinocytes. We'll be talking about a few of the layers of the skin. I'll be comparing our skin to a fence and a screen, depending on which type of melanin you have and how much of it you have. We'll talk about how a human and a unicorn can reproduce, or whatever the heck this picture is. We'll talk a little bit too about how fungi meet with your toenails. Pretty awesome. This is a really interesting lesson. A couple of articles. This is gonna be a long one. One suggestion I would have for this video would be to watch it once and not really take notes, and do that for the quiz. I hope to have the formative quiz on Friday in class be easy enough that if you just listen to this video attentively, you'd be able to do it. Then go back later in depth. And so this is a harder lesson, but I love it. So again, if you have a lot of time right now, feel free to pause and take notes and do everything you can. If not, this is a video I would watch twice. This is a video that is really important for the next summative and is just really, really interesting. So what we're going to talk about is the four main cell types: keratinocytes, melanocytes, Merkel cells, Langerhans cells. They do a lot of the functions of the integumentary system. If you have your book at home, I'll actually get it out and open it up to this table 4.1, in chapter 4. So we're in our third unit, but we're in chapter 4 of the book. And actually just point this out. If I was awesome, I would have had this printed for you already, and you can just highlight it and underline it right on the side. This is something I would handwrite when you have time, or even just write on note cards, each one of these functions being a different note card. I think would be fantastic. I think this table explains the whole system very effectively. By the end of the lesson, I hope this table, what I'm just showing, so I just showed this with the four cell types. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth with some other stuff too, and how, if you guys see all these colors are linked, black goes to black, blue goes to blue, etc., how all of the functions of the integumentary system come out. That comes out in this lesson. So first off, if I had to go back in time, I would tie another layer of the integumentary system to a function. So the hypodermis, hypo meaning under, hypodermis is the lowest layer, the deepest layer of your integumentary system. It has a function. Its function is to cushion blows, so it prevents mechanical damage. When you're an offensive lineman, you want fat because you're getting hit really hard by really strong dudes. When you're a running back, you don't want fat because it can slow you down and decrease cardiovascular conditioning, but you do want some fat for cushion, to decrease the damage of blows. So that's a huge part, a huge function. That's one element of preventing mechanical damage, is this deep adipose tissue. Another one, just as review from the other day in class, we talked about acid mantle being sebum and sweat, kills bacteria on the surface. Phagocytes kill bacteria deep down in the reticular layer of the dermis. So those three are responsible for bacterial damage. So those are the only two functions I've really talked about, are those two. We'll cover everything again this lesson. So getting into it, we've talked about can large girls sing bass, or come let's get sunburned was a one that Maggie Searcy wrote in her comments. Come let's get sunburned is another way to remember those layers of the epidermis. This lesson we're going to talk now about these black terms up and below, the keratinocytes, these dendritic cells that we'll call Langerhans cells. So this is the same as a Langerhans cell. Melanocytes, and these Merkel cells right here. So those are the four we're focusing on in this lesson. So first one, Merkel cells. Let's start with one of the easiest ones. We'll end with the longest, hardest one. Merkel cell is basically a receptor, kind of a part of your nervous system, but again, this is where it marries the integumentary system. Questions we're going to answer here in this little section are: how many senses are in my skin? Which layers of skin have receptors? So this is kind of answered with Merkel cells, plus there are some others that aren't Merkel, and this is where I'm kind of artificially tying them in under this heading of Merkel cell. So first off, if you guys see this actual X-ray scan, dyed X-ray scan of the skin, this top dark pink part being the epidermis, this bottom clear part being the dermis, you'll find these Merkel cells right at the very, very bottom layer, deepest layer of the epidermis. So this is in the stratum basale right here. That's the pink Merkel cell, sometimes called the Merkel disc. that is a nerve ending that is the sensory receptor for touch. So as you touch your finger, you are stimulating a ton of Merkel cells, hundreds and hundreds of them as I do that on my tip of my finger, index finger. You have the most of those in your hands and your lips. So that senses touch. They actually have axons extending away from them as they bring this action potential, this nervous stimulation down this axon back to the brain to say that's what's being touched. So what we're focusing on here in this big diagram, eventually I want you guys to fill in this whole diagram. Right now we're focusing on the nervous structures. This is, I believe, a little bit different than your book. You might want to check. Sensory nerve fiber right here are these small little axons that are going up into those Merkel cells. So again, that one sense in this diagram, this is a pretty simplistic diagram. One version is that you have nerve fibers that go up to Merkel cells for touch. You also have these really skinny nerve fibers that go up that do not end in a Merkel cell. They go up and end as a pain receptor, and those aren't a particular cell. Those are just loose pain receptor nerve endings that sense pain. Deep, deep, deep down, you have a lamellar corpuscle right here, which is a pressure receptor. There's another one, another pressure receptor that's mentioned in the coloring book in your packet, but I'm going to focus on the lamellar corpuscle. As you push down, you feel it's a different kind of reception. That's a pressure versus a touch. That's in the reticular layer of your dermis. There's also hair follicle nerves that sense when your hair is pulled, and so those also go to the root, the bulb of your hair follicle. So lots of different nervous structures in the integumentary system. So if I had to go back, if you guys have your book open, if you go back to say, all right, where do these receptors show up in this table of functions? One way of preventing mechanical damage is when you are touched, when your fingers touch, you jerk away, and so you prevent future damage. So those pressure receptors, those lamellar corpuscles right here, alert the nervous system, and so you move away from that mechanical damage. Second type is chemical damage. You actually have pain receptors called nociceptors that, again, when you're sensing a huge drop in pH, you touch an acid or a base, you touch oven cleaner, you touch car battery acid, you're going to feel pain in your nociceptors, stimulation from your nociceptors. So nociceptors can be activated from chemical damage like acids and bases. It can be activated from too hot, too cold. And not just too hot, ouch, but I'm feeling it warm up. That's its own receptor that's not shown in that simple model. Those are called thermoreceptors, and those are for hot and cold. So you have touch receptors, Merkel cells, you have lamellar corpuscles, which are pressure receptors, you have nociceptors, which are pain receptors, you have thermoreceptors, which are hot and cold receptors. It's amazing how many different kinds of senses you have, right? So I would say your sense of hot and cold, your sense of pain, your sense of touch, your sense of pressure are all different senses, which is weird. I haven't even talked about hearing, sight, balance, any of that stuff. So I think we have way more than 5 senses, and we'll get into that in third quarter more. In your coloring book, I copied this over. Feel free and fill some of these in now. We've talked about the Merkel cell. We've also talked about the Pacinian corpuscle, which is M, which is right down here. That's the deep reticular layer Pacinian corpuscle. That's the same as a lamellar corpuscle, by the way. Lots of synonyms. Don't you love it? So feel free and fill those in. So we've talked a little bit about the layers. We've talked about those different senses in which sensory receptors are responsible for each of those types. All right, so we're moving on from Merkel cells, and now we're talking about Langerhans cells. This is the second of the 4 main cell types found in your skin. So Langerhans cells are found in your epidermis. You guys see I've labeled it here, B. This is the second type. So this Langerhans cell is sometimes called a dendritic cell because there's these long dendrite legs. Dendrite in anatomy means kind of like a leg-like structure. They were originally thought to be an extension of your nervous system because oftentimes neurons have these long dendrite legs that extend out everywhere and form connections with other neurons. It was discovered by Paul Langerhans, a 21-year-old guy. He thought they were part of the nervous system. Where we found now these are not part of the nervous system. They're not sensory receptors. They're more of an on-site medic. They're more a part of your immune system So they have an immune function of eating dying skin cells. They can actually stop cancer in its tracks and eat cancer cells, which is cool. So if you think about it, one treatment maybe for skin cancer would be to promote the function of Langerhans cells. That could be its own doctoral dissertation in college. So lots of potential there. They alert the immune system to bacterial and viral invasions. So they are kind of like the scout, scouting out the foreign lands and alerting the immune system to have a heavier response and send macrophages, phagocytes. They also have a weird connection with HIV, and this is interesting. So this is something I was researching a lot last year, researched again this year. So again, I'm going to the NIH, National Institutes of Health, and there's different extensions of the NIH to look up things. This is for vitiligo, so let me go back to Langerhans. I typed in what role does Langerhans cell have in HIV. I got a couple different sites. One was ScienceDirect.com. I was suspicious right away. But if I go inside, I see that the article is actually from this Journal of Dermatological Science. I find the same article in the NCBI, which is an extension of the NIH. So this is I Trust More. This is like a very reliable Wikipedia. That's just a little bit harder to understand. So two things with Langerhans cells. One is it's thought that Langerhans cells actually limit HIV invasion, that the more you have, the more active your Langerhans cells are, the more limited HIV invasion, which oftentimes happens in the genital region, even among heterosexual partners, way more common in homosexual partners. But even heterosexual partners, it's thought to start through the skin, can start through the skin with Langerhans cells. Another site, though, another study is showing that they actually are, they have an important role. It's almost like they're the first ones infected by HIV and they propagate or continue on the HIV virus. So there's not a lot of consensus, as far as I can tell, on the role of Langerhans cells with HIV, but it seems like they're connected in an important way. So they have kind of a funny role. They're part of the immune system. They protect us, but maybe those scouts are also the ones who bring back the infection to the rest of your immune system. And so you have this autoimmune disease. Kind of interesting. So again, we've already talked about Merkel cells. We talked about Langerhans cells. Now we're going to get into two types that are longer and really, really interesting. Melanocytes, if you think of melanin, and keratinocytes, or keratin. Some of you might have heard of keratin being in like conditioners or shampoos. Melanin is what produces the kind of pigmentation, the coloration in your eyes, your hair, your skin. So I really like these two. So let's dig in. Before we do, this is a quick picture of me getting. This is the morning of my wedding day with my groomsmen. This is my brother. This is a good friend growing up, one of my brother's best friends, Nate, and three of the guys I threw track with. There's a javelin thrower and two hammer throwers. It was a lot of fun. And yes, I used to have a goatee. Don't laugh at me. My wife will not let me grow that goatee back. I've tried. She doesn't let me. But it's okay. She looks at me a lot. Okay, so with melanin, here's some questions as we go into melanin, thinking about it. How does melanin give us so many colors? How many shades of brown and white, even in hair, shades of, the dirty blonde to the platinum blonde to the towhead to the straight black afro to the ginger, the red. There's so many different colors. How does that work? Are redheads going to go extinct? We're going to actually answer that more in class than in this video. Who's most likely to get skin cancer? Who among us are most likely to get it? And what's up with gray hair, white hair, albinos, vitiligo? We'll talk about vitiligo also. So melanocytes, again, looking at this, these heavy layers of stratum corneum up here, these dead cells on top is right here. All the way down to the very bottom, the stratum basale, you find this dark pigmentation. These are the melanocytes that are the cells that pump out melanin. Melanin is just a protein. So right here, see, I have these gray melanocytes, but I have these dark pigment melanin that they are pumping out into these keratinocytes, these yellow keratinocytes, which are what end up here. So you basically have these factories that produce melanin, the melanocytes produce melanin, and they pump those out onto other surrounding cells, which eventually move up as they mature and get older, when they're on their deathbed, when they eventually die. So your coloration starts in your stratum basale and works more superficial. In your coloring book, again, add some things that we've talked about. I don't know if we add anything there. I think just melanocyte, getting used to these terms. So melanin, there's two main types of melanin, two main families of melanin. Within each family, there's subtypes of eumelanin, subtypes of pheomelanin. So typically eumelanin in the skin, eumelanin is by far the most common, especially with hair. But eumelanin in the skin will produce a darker brown or black skin, um, which is a lot more effective at something and a lot less effective at something else. Pheomelanin is in the hair, produces yellow or red, but there's more pheomelanin in the skin, expresses more of the white pigmentation that I have. They are flipped from eumelanin. They are good at one thing and they're bad at the other thing. So they're kind of opposites in a little way. If there is very, very, very little melanin being produced at all, so your melanocytes are now at the end of their life, the stem cells that become melanocytes basically get exhausted in old age. You start to turn gray, or you might have a mutation that causes gray early in life. Or if there's no melanin being produced at all, then you have white hair, white skin. So that explains a little bit of the hair color shift. We'll watch this video in class about redheads. So let me make an analogy. So I just alluded to something it was good at, something it wasn't good at. It just kind of gave it away a little bit. So next slide, we talk about, I'm going to make an analogy first before I talk about this. Let's actually do this first. So melanin basically acts as a guard, as a shield that guards against the photons of the sun, the energy molecules from the sun, the photons. If you have a lot of pheomelanin or you have less melanin, then you are like this gate, this fence in a field. You prevent cows from getting through, nice, but dogs can get through, cats can get through, any sort of insect can get through. So lots and lots of stuff is getting through this open fence. And so this is like me. Photons get through my skin. I burn way more easily than someone with eumelanin or someone with darker skin, someone who has kind of that olive tone. You might think of someone from Italy or Spain, someone has an olive tone, where this is a gate, but if you guys see this fine fence link behind it, this is an interesting gate. It's almost like it prevents cows from getting through, and dogs can't get through, and insects would be able to get through this. So it's preventing, if I'm making an analogy for your skin, this is allowing less photons, fewer photons getting through, but nowhere near as effective as a full-on, intense, super hyper screen door with tons of mesh that are preventing even the smallest insects from getting through. So just like the coloration here, if you have black skin, you have a hyperabundance of eumelanin, which is incredibly effective at blocking photons. So you're much less likely to get skin cancer. But the person with pheomelanin is a lot more likely to synthesize vitamin D, which will actually prevent colon cancer. So if you have a lot of pheomelanin, like me, you're way more likely to die of skin cancer and develop skin cancer, but you are great at synthesizing vitamin D. More on this in the next class period on the sun, but this is kind of a start, kind of interesting. There are also two things here, just to mention this briefly. Stress hormones are thought to disrupt the delivery of melanin. That's a typo. Melanin to keratinocytes. So maybe the stress affects the delivery of melanin, which would speed along the process of graying, so premature graying. There also is a condition called alopecia areata, which attack pigmented hairs. So they can actually attack the type of hairs that have eumelanin or pheomelanin, so you turn prematurely white. So alopecia areata is another interesting dysfunction. So going back to the table, if you have your book open, go back to the table. This is the function that is provided by the melanocytes. Melanin is produced by melanocytes. Melanin is what prevents UV damage. So a brief overview: mechanical damage, chemical damage, bacterial damage, UV damage, thermal damage. That's a lot of damage prevented by your integumentary system. UV damage by those photons of the sun is prevented by melanin. This is a spot I want to encourage you guys right now to actually stop the video and read the albinism article in your unit packet and answer these two questions. So Why do some cultures eat albinos? That's a weird thing. Why would that be true? Which cell type is affected by albinism? I bet you can guess already. And more importantly, how? How does albinism affect that important cell type in the integumentary system? And yes, any kind of animal can also be albino. An alligator, a crocodile, a dog, you name it. If it produces melanin, it can have a mutation that makes it an albino. Next one, interesting one, is vitiligo. Vitiligo has affected, and yes, that's Michael Jackson if you guys' eyes are there. Vitiligo is another type of condition, not like being an albino, but similar in that your melanocytes are affected. The model Winnie Harlow, she changed her name. Her name was something else, then she changed to Winnie Harlow. You might have seen her on like America's Top Model, says the guy with no TV. She has the kind of vitiligo where her melanocytes are affected, and there's a kind of symmetry, not perfect symmetry. So there's not perfect symmetry across the body, but there are very similar places on both sides of her body that are affected by this condition. So there is the kind of symmetrical vitiligo, which affects both sides. There's also the vitiligo, which shows up randomly on one side of the body, one part of the body. It can start to expand and affect your whole body. It can actually start out like by a stressful event and reduce and get smaller. I think Michael Jackson did have vitiligo, so he's probably the most popular example. This wasn't just a result of his desire to be white or his surgeries. He actually had a medical condition called vitiligo, affected his melanocytes. White people can have it too. It just is less noticeable because there's less pigmentation to affect. So, but it can also affect. The reason why oftentimes you type in vitiligo, you get a lot of pictures with black people, people with a lot of eumelanin. It's just way more obvious when they lose their coloration because they have more melanin. But it can affect every race and gender. I'm really interested in vitiligo in this because when you ask why does this occur, oftentimes we expect that there's a clear answer. And in vitiligo, there's not. There's really an unknown cause. What we find is there's a high correlation between those who have an autoimmune disease, like hyperthyroidism that attacks their thyroid. Any kind of occurrence of autoimmune disease results in a higher occurrence of vitiligo. So it seems like it has something to do with your immune system, but we're not exactly sure. There's lots of websites kind of going through, again, the websites I looked at that I said, yes, I trust these are NIH, Mayo Clinic. Okay, so we talked about melanin, melanocytes, super interesting. Melanin gives us so many colors because there's different types, different families, eumelanin, pheomelanin. Review that in your mind. What kind of colors does that produce? We'll talk about redheads next class. Who's most likely to get skin cancer? Who's most likely to synthesize vitamin D and prevent colon cancer? What's up with gray hair, white hair, albinos, vitiligo? So review that real quick. Pause the video. Quick break. This is pictures. I just talked earlier about my wedding day with my groomsmen. Here's pictures of my wife. This is 4 years ago. Neither one of us really likes taking pictures, so I would always have these funny back of our head pictures. I'm sure she would get mad at me for showing this. This is a picture this last summer with my son. We were outside the Oregon Trail Museum in Oregon City near Portland. This last summer was a lot of fun. My son learned about the Oregon Trail last year, so he had a blast going there. And she loves joking with him. She loves him a lot. My wife is Luke's stepmom. Okay, so we talked about Merkel cells, talked about Langerhans cells, talked about melanocytes. The only one left is keratinocytes. So again, this is the overview of the epidermis. The keratinocytes are everywhere. Everywhere you see these yellow cells that eventually die, their nuclei start to break up here and then become dead in your stratum corneum. All of these are keratinocytes. They hold the protein keratin. That is super important, and that's what we're going to learn about. So why do I care about melanin? There's lots of reasons to care about that protein melanin, lots of protections it provides. It explains the beauty we see in all peoples in the world. Why I care about keratin? I think there's 3 reasons why, 3 kind of functions that extend from these 3. So keratin's super tough, it absorbs water, and actually this isn't really a function. This is just all the ways it can go wrong, all the pathology, and that's awesome. So let me keep going. So keratin is tough. Going back to your book, in that table of functions, keratin provides protecting against mechanical damage, chemical damage, and because it holds on to water so well, it prevents desiccation or drying out. So when I say that your sebaceous glands produce oil that moisturizes the skin and hair, your keratin also does pretty much the same thing. It moisturizes in that it doesn't really lose water. It absorbs water and prevents drying out. Super important. So again, an x-ray of this, a real-life tissue x-ray of this membrane. The keratinocytes are all over in the epidermis. The melanocytes are in that stratum basale in the bottom of your epidermis. And those are the two coolest cells of your integumentary system. So questions we'll answer. Why are my hair, skin, and nails so durable? Why do cats get hairballs? What allows hair to hold its shape? How much force can hair resist? So first one, chitin and keratin are two of the toughest proteins in the world. So chitin and keratin are found all over in biology. Chitin in like the shells of beetles, keratin in our hair, all over the place in the biological world. In your body, 85% of your hair is keratin. Stratum corneum, so that very, very top layer is basically just all a stratified squamous tissue of dead keratinocytes. And your nails are just a ton of layers of keratin, 80% keratin. So those pretty tough stuff. Hair, nails, the outside of your skin are made of keratin. Keratin is tough. Even your stomach can't mess with it. And yes, this is not your stomach. This is hair inside of your stomach. And we call it Rapunzel syndrome. Because if Rapunzel ate her hair, she's got a lot of it, and that's what it would look like. We're all used to cats coughing up hairballs because their stomachs can't digest it either. The stomach acid isn't enough of a solvent, isn't acidic enough to break down the keratin in your hair. My daughter Flo, she has a nervous thing when she's tired or she's kind of angry. She pulls at her hair and eats her hair, and I'm constantly pulling hair out of her fingers trying to get her not to eat her hair. We actually gave her a haircut recently because this side of her head was like kind of bald, and this side was super long. So I'm slightly worried that she has Rapunzel syndrome. It is way more common in kids than in adults, but not impossible for adults to do this too. So keratin is tough. Keratin prevents those three things. Oh, sorry, keratin prevents these two. Well, it prevents desiccation too. But keratin is tough, results in that physical barrier on the outside, in your stratum corneum, and it doesn't really allow the acids and bases to get through because it's so tough. Just like my stomach acid can't break it through my stomach, if you put acid on my skin, it has a huge barrier to get through and all that keratin. Keratin is also very, very tough. If you take a lock of 100 strands, you can withstand 10 kilograms of force. There's 2.2 pounds in 1 kilogram. So 100 strands of hair can withstand about 22 pounds of force. A whole head of hair can withstand 12 tons of force. Unless, of course, you have my hair and I'm balding. So that would be less than that. Blonde. This is interesting. Blondes have an average of 150,000 hair strands and a head of hair. So that's the most. Redheads have the least, and brown and black have in between. That's not the most important part for the test. That's just interesting. So given that keratin's so tough, it also can hold its shape. So you put water in it, it absorbs water, and it's tough enough to maintain the same shape. So we've talked about each of these briefly. Pause the video. Go ahead and review that. I'm going to charge ahead. Keratin absorbs water. Here's ways that keratin, given that it does absorb water, here's some results of that. So we're going to ask, you're going to be able to answer at the end of this, why does my skin wrinkle after I shower? When should I cut my nails? Is my hair dead, even my hair root? Why does my hair curl in humidity? Or when it's wet, when you get it really, really wet and your hair's curlier. How do I keep from getting split ends? I bet most of this just ties right back into keratin. Some of this is self-explanatory. So keratin in the stratum corneum absorbs water and swells, but the lower layers don't, so you have this bunching up of your stratum corneum in your epidermis. And so it causes, when you've been in the shower or bath for a long time, causes your fingers to wrinkle because all of that keratin is soaking in that water in the stratum corneum primarily and deeper. So your epidermis has lots of keratin all over, and that's soaking up all that water. Wrinkles appear where the epidermis is thicker. So you have a thicker corneum and a thicker stratum lucidum. A couple of students asked in the last video, they were asking, well, stratum lucidum, wait, clarify that again. Why is that like an asterisk by the acronym Can Large Girls Sing Bass? I put an asterisk by it because the stratum lucidum is usually only in the thickest parts of the skin. So a great example is the thick part of your skin on your hands. There's a thick layer of stratum lucidum there. So the keratinocytes there and the keratinocytes in your corneum are absorbing water. So you have all these wrinkles, most noticeable in your hand. Nails soften. This super hard nail softens after a shower because it's absorbed all this water. They're kind of full and soft. So cut your nails after a shower and you'll do less harsh damage to your nails. Every fingernail has at least 100 layers of keratin. So it's basically like, in some ways, your that stratified squamous almost. It's just a bunch of dead layers of keratin. Makes it super dense and hard. Interesting fact, not super important for the summative, the more blood flow you have, the faster your nails grow. The faster this growth down here in the stem cell area of your nail, the faster those nails grow. So in the summertime or in your dominant hand, you'll actually find your nails grow a little bit faster. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed that. Again, I hope we can talk more about your nail and what part of your finger can you cut off and have the rest of it grow back. And I hope to talk about that in class. Okay, so keratin absorbs water. This is really the kind of an artificial time for me to talk about hair. This is an article I want you to read. This is in your unit packet. It says, how do hairs know to grow? This is a super interesting article talking about the life cycle of hair. So what are the stages of the life cycle of hair? So as you read it, highlight the interest of these two questions. So what are the stages of the hair life cycle? And why does hair color change over the course of your life? Can you explain that? Maybe including some of these structures too. So again, label whatever in here that you haven't labeled yet. Hair is also wavy and curly because it absorbs water. When the keratin in this cuticle, this outer layer of the hair, absorbs water, it causes the whole shaft to bend. So as that outer layer gets full, it causes a change in shape, just like when you are in the bath. We talked about that, your fingers soaking up that water and causing those rolls. So that has to do with keratin. Again, my daughter, Flo, her hair is super curly. I've never had to deal with curly hair before. I chase her around with a water bottle with conditioner a lot and brush out her hair. She gets super curly when it's wet. It's amazing how instantly that happens because of the absorption of keratin. So there's a chemical reason why I can understand my daughter's hair. Even if I'm not a nurse or a doctor, it just kind of enriches my life to understand why that works. Split ends occur because, yes, the hair follicle is dead as it extends out of the body. And the older it gets, the more abuse it gets, the more damage it gets, and there's no blood supply to replenish this. So keeping good care of your hair, moisturizing it with conditioner, with water, the kind of a lot of conditioners, there's keratin that kind of resupplies the hair follicle with keratin, keeps it nice and new. Heat and chemicals can also damage hair, cause more fraying. I've learned, but from my wife, is to leave conditioner in. When you start the shower with shampoo, you finish the shower with conditioner. Like my daughter, I don't rinse all of the conditioner out of my daughter's hair. I leave it in to moisturize her hair so she doesn't get split ends. She keeps her hair healthy. Okay, so we talked about each of these. Pause the video, review that real quick. How would you summarize each of those questions? I'm going fast, I know, but we're at like 33 minutes. There's a really cool lab in class tomorrow, so this is why I'm doing this so fast. Okay, last one, guys. Is keratin gone wrong? What causes acne, athlete's foot, skin drying? I'm going to self-diagnose my family right now, even though I think I already did about Rapunzel syndrome. Is that a bad thing to self-diagnose people? Can a human and a unicorn produce viable offspring? So let's roll. Clumps of keratin can actually slough off of your stratum corneum and fall into this duct, this hair follicle duct, and plug. So they basically glue themselves together and plug it. And then inside, all of this sebum builds up, so this plug. And then if there's an infection of a type of bacteria, P. acnes is kind of a family of bacteria, for them to proliferate and reproduce, they need low oxygen. So you need that plug so no oxygen is getting in. Then you have this buildup, this infection of bacteria. And the reason why you have acne or pimples or zits oftentimes is because this keratin, this dead layer of keratin, sloughing off and plugging your hair follicle pores. So why wash your face to prevent acne or zits? It's because you're going to slough off these extra layers of keratin, prevent plugs, and that's why you wash your face, and to wash out the bacteria. There is a foot fungus that can live in between your toes and in your nails and actually eat keratin. So that foot fungus feeds on keratin. Protein can be broken down for energy. Keratin's a protein, so it can actually feed off keratin. So that's what athlete's foot is. It's just a fungus that eats your keratin. That's so cool. Onychomycosis. Mycosis means fungus. Mycorrhizae is like a species of fungus, or of a fungus. So onychomycosis is the condition where the fungus begins eating off your toenail, and your whole toenail can get eaten. Vaseline actually is a pretty good solution to that. Kills fungus. But I'm not a doctor, so there are other antifungal creams. Last one, skin has a difficult time staying hydrated after water has evaporated from keratinocytes. So the keratinocytes hold water. Once that has evaporated, it is super hard for your skin to stay hydrated, because when you're in the shower, like Ferris Bueller is here, hot water and soap will wash off the top layer of your stratum corneum, the keratinocytes there, as well as the sebum, as well as the glycolipids and sebum. So you need both of those to moisturize your skin to prevent desiccation. Desiccation, I would write this down. Desiccation, which is right here, bigger. Desiccation right here is the drying out of your skin. So moisturizing prevents desiccation. So keratin does it, sebum does it, and bam, that's that function right there. Another one is keratosis pilaris, is kind of these bumpy keratin plugs that you can get all over your skin. My daughter Enika, my 4-year-old, has this on her arms and kind of on her back and butt a little bit. In this picture, she is making, with these like large kind of weird Lego blocks, she's making beds for her brother's guys as well as her Daniel Tiger dolls. She's pretty cute, and it's just kind of fun for her to make that. But she has, I believe, she has keratosis pilaris. I'm self-diagnosing her. Is that bad? How about we talk about that in class? Last one, cutaneous horns. This is the weirdest thing. I know this is probably freaking you out right now, that you can actually have these horns growing out of your head, or growths of keratinocytes. So imagine with me, rather than having cancer where you have another cell in your organs that are splitting up and growing to innumerable amounts and there's no stopping it. Imagine you have a mutation where your keratinocytes are growing out of control. And that produces this unicorn horn, these cutaneous horns, as they're called. I've never met someone with a cutaneous horn, but man, that's weird. They can be benign or malignant, which meaning they can be the kind of growth that is malignant. This is the kind of, mal is bad. So this is kind of the, this is what we usually call cancer. A malignant growth is usually what we call cancer. If that's growing out, then maybe the same kind of growth will be growing back deeper into their dermis, not just outside the body, but actually back into the body, and that might eventually kill them for various reasons. So malignant is constantly growing, continues to grow in all directions. Benign might grow and then it might stop. So cancer can grow for a time and then stop, and it's a benign tumor. So this is basically a malignant tumor if it continues to grow and has these bad side effects. It's a benign tumor if it grows and it stops and it stopped having bad side effects. But both kind of cancerous. Okay, so that's what we talked about. Those 5 questions. Stop the video, review. Can you summarize what we just talked about? Keratin's tough. It provides it prevents these 2 types of damage. Keratin absorbs water, prevents desiccation. And overall, that's what we talked about this lesson. I know that was super long. That's 40 minutes long. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Forgive me. I will do my best. I'm working my butt off too. I'll do my best to review all this stuff with you guys on that catch-up day, that review day. So this is less of a foreign language. But thank you guys for listening to me.